Now, we welcome to the show Leslie Danks Burke, the Democratic candidate for New York's 58th State Senate District. While the incumbent Tom O'Mara won the election, we wanted to hear Leslie's thoughts on how the 58th Senate District, which includes Tompkins and Schuyler counties, could be improved going forward. Leslie, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Peter.
So early last month, you spoke with us in a different interview, and you mentioned a couple key issues that constituents are, expressed concerns about. One of those was that in both Republican and Democratic parts of the district, one issue that everyone brought up was that New Yorkers are paying more in taxes than people in other states and getting less back. What can New York legislators do to address this issue?
There's one slam dunk solution that folks have been talking about for a couple of decades, but no one's actually moved forward on, and that is to get rid of the unfunded Medicaid mandate. That sounds really complicated. It's not. What this is that we pay for health care, we pay for Medicaid in New York State differently than any other state in the country does. We pay for it through property taxes. And what that does is it raises everybody's property taxes, and it pushes healthcare costs down onto the people who are least able to afford it. So it's very regressive. New York could change that. That should make Republicans very happy because it's going to cut taxes, which they say they want. Footnote, I don't see Republicans actually cutting taxes all that much, but they sure say that they want to. And it should make Democrats happy because it broadens the universal health care access to more folks, and it gets rid of a very regressive tax that hits the working poor hardest. So it is a solution that should be popular across the board, and in fact we know New Yorkers all across the board want this to happen. So why hasn't it happened? Well, the big health insurance corporations that profiteer off of healthcare in New York State right now don't want it to happen, and so there's a lot of lobbying that goes on. But that would be the first thing, that was going to be the first thing that I would introduce had I won this election, and it sure would be the first thing that anybody in New York State politics could take up to make a real difference in people's lives.
Gotcha, thank you. And on a separate issue, farming is a larger part of the 58th district that many people realized. For example, data from 2012 shows that Tompkins County has 558 farms, and Schuyler County has 390 farms. What do you think a focus on farming does for the 58th Senate District?
Well, the Finger Lakes and Southern Tier area is the center of farming for New York State, and New York State is an agricultural economy. It's one of the top economic sectors of our economy here in New York is ag, and we're losing our local family farms at our peril. It's going to affect our economy significantly if we lose too many more local family farms. And just in the pandemic, we saw New York City ran out of food last spring. There were huge food shortages in food pantries, and that wasn't because there wasn't food. It was because the supply chain broke down. The silos were full, the processing plants were full. We just couldn't get the food from upstate New York to the city. And that's a huge infrastructure problem, and it's an agriculture problem that could be readily fixed. It's the job of government to fix that. But again, we have huge corporate interests that are standing in the way.
Yeah, and with that solution that you're proposing and what you proposed for the tax cuts, what do you think could be done by current legislatures to kind of to escape this sort of lobbying fueled MO that has now, if there's these solutions that the constituents would much rather prefer?
Yeah, I think that we've had a real challenge, it's sort of a stalemate, because upstate New York has been represented by legislators who've been there for decades and have not gotten the job done, predominantly of the Republican Party. And then New York City is predominantly represented by Democrats. And so you run into a stalemate there where, the Republicans simply aren't at the table. They aren't at the conversation, and they're not able to, for whatever reason, either because they aren't trying hard enough or because they simply can't, get a square deal for the folks that they seek to represent. But, there's real opportunity for change on the horizon there. I lost my race, but there were upstate Democrats who won their races. In fact, there's now a member of the Democratic Conference, the majority Democratic Conference in New York State, from every one of the five biggest cities across upstate New York: Albany and Rochester and Buffalo and Syracuse. There's someone representing Utica now who's going to be in the New York State Senate, Senator-elect Michelle Hinchy. So that's a real opportunity for those Democratic senators to actually get a seat at the table for upstate New York. And so I think that's a possibility for real change that we might see on the horizon.
I see. Thank you. And what are there other issues separate from these tax cuts we were talking about and focusing on farming? Are there other issues that you saw laid out by constituents while you were campaigning that you think need to be focused on more by New York State legislators? And what would you recommend to incumbent Senator Tom O'Mara to address these issues?
My recommendation to incumbent Senator Tom O'Mara is to actually get to work for the people of the district. And he's been there for 16 years. We keep on getting the same, lack of representation, lack of economic growth here in this region. Elmira didn't come out of recession after 2008. It's one of the only two cities in the entire country that didn't come out of recession after 2008. And that's on the folks who've been representing this region for years. That doesn't mean they can't change. That doesn't mean they can't get in there and actually start to get to work for the region. Now, my past opponent, Senator O'Mara, when I would point this out during the campaign, would say, well, I can't do anything because I'm up against the Democrats. And my response to that always was, well, then why are you there? Why not try at least, man? And I think that this is his opportunity to get in there and really try. Let's see if you can make an effort and actually get a fair share for the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes.
And with the state Senate at veto-proof levels, the New York Health Act could pass. What's your prediction of it passing?
I think there's a pretty good chance that that's going to pass this year, and I think that's exciting news for the folks in New York State. I think it's going to be really important to watch the exact bill that gets passed because, like I was pointing out earlier, there are a lot of health insurance corporations that profiteer quite a bit off of the current healthcare structure that we have, and they're going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that they don't lose out on those profits. We're in a pandemic here, right? And there's no doubt right now that our healthcare system is broken. Health insurance companies are making billions more in profit this year than they did last year, and yet at the same time hospitals are overloaded, supply chains are groaning under the pressure. There's hundreds of thousands of people dying across the country. Families are going bankrupt because of the health care costs. And so we see this real disparity in the folks who are profiting dramatically off the pandemic and most of the rest of us who are really suffering and struggling. So that's the backdrop against which this New York Health Act conversation is going to happen. And those health insurance companies that are making a whole lot of money are going to fight tooth and nail to keep that going. So we're going to have to really pay close attention to the details of the New York Health Act and make sure that it becomes a piece of legislation that actually is going to cut costs for regular folks and actually is going to provide universal care for people across the board. Because New York State has an opportunity to be a real leader here and to put in place a system that, could set the course for what other states might choose to do or what the federal government might choose to do in the future.
And if the act passes as you're predicting, once it is passed, that's when the real work starts. And as you're mentioning, I wanted to know if you could expand on this. What should the legislature be thinking about and planning to implement once the health plan is passed, if it passes?
Yeah, the legislators who are looking at this are going to really have to dig in to the boring details of the budget. And here's one example. If you take a look at an audit that New York State Comptroller did last year of the Medicaid program in New York. And, Medicaid is a sort of universal health care plan, right? In New York State, it's not a single-payer plan. There's companies that subcontract off Medicaid, but it's as close as we get. And 1/4 of New Yorkers right now receive their health care through that Medicaid plan. Comptroller Tom DiNapoli took a look at the plan in New York, and in just one audit across the board, he found close to $1 billion in fat, in inflated costs that could be cut out easily out of health insurer profits. So if just on a first pass you can find $1 billion in the program that covers 1/4 of New Yorkers, then imagine what kind of fat there might be that is, that's going to profiteering and is not going to provide health care to real people. So I think that what the legislators are going to have to do is really buckle down and look very, very closely at the budgetary implications of this to make sure that it's actually going to serve New York's interests.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are just about out of time. Are there any last words you'd like to share with our listeners?
I really enjoyed running for office. It was a real gift to me, and it was a real calling in a way. And those issues and concerns that I talked about on the campaign trail don't go away just because I lost the race. There's a whole lot of conversation that we've got to continue to have out there. And I am, for one, very optimistic that New Yorkers and Americans across the board are engaged in a way that we haven't been in years, and I see a real opportunity on the horizon. So I'm optimistic, and I'm excited about what's coming next.
Well, thank you so much for joining our program, Leslie. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You got it. Thanks very much for inviting me. Take care.